Hey everyone, Chloe here. It's funny how life can just flip. One minute, you're living in this bubble of what you think is pure, unbreakable friendship, and the next, that bubble bursts, leaving you gasping for air in a world that suddenly feels cold and alien. For most of my life, I was the kind of person who wore her heart on her sleeve. I believed in people, in the good in them, in the power of connection. My friends, they weren't just people I hung out with. They were my chosen family, the ones who knew my deepest secrets, my silliest quirks, my biggest dreams. We were inseparable, a tight knit crew against the world, or so I thought. Our usual spot was this old, slightly rundown coffee shop downtown, the kind with mismatched chairs and the lingering scent of stale pastries and endless conversations. We spend hours there, huddled in our favorite booth, sharing everything from the mundane details of our day to the grand, impossible plans for our futures. There was Liam, always the calm, steady one, the voice of reason. Then Maya, bright and bubbly, the one who could always make us laugh, even when things felt heavy. And finally, Noah, the quiet observer, but with a sharp wit that would catch you off guard. We were a perfect balance, a constellation of personalities that just clicked. I trusted them with my life, with my very soul. I told them things I wouldn't even whisper to my own reflection. We had this unspoken pact, this sacred bond that promised loyalty, understanding, and unwavering support, no matter what. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays were our designated decompression days after a particularly brutal Monday. We were all there, just like always. The air was thick with the usual easy chatter, the clinking of mugs, the low hum of other patrons. I was recounting this ridiculous incident from my morning commute, something about spilling coffee all over myself right before a big presentation. Everyone was laughing, even me, because it was just so me asterisk to mess up in such a spectacular fashion. That's when the conversation shifted, subtly at first. It was about a small project we were working on together, something for a local charity event. I had been in charge of a specific part, a minor detail really, but one that required a bit of precision. And I, in my usual clumsy, well meaning way, had messed it up. Not intentionally, not maliciously, just a genuine, accidental oversight. It was a tiny error, easily fixable, but it meant a slight delay for the others. I remember the moment I realized my mistake. My stomach dropped. I immediately apologized, my face burning. Oh my god, guys, I am so sorry. I completely messed up the banner design. I used the wrong font size and it's going to need a reprint. It was totally my fault. I was rushing. I wasn't paying attention. I braced myself for the usual playful teasing, maybe a mock groan, but then a quick reassurance that it was fine, we'd fix it. That's how it always went. We were a team. We covered for each other. But this time, the laughter died down a little too quickly. Liam cleared his throat, a sound that usually meant he was about to offer a practical solution, but instead he just looked at Maya. Maya, who usually jumped in with a comforting word, just gave me a tight, almost imperceptible smile. Noah, who rarely spoke unless he had something profound to say, just stared into his coffee cup. A strange quiet settled over our booth, a quiet that felt heavier than usual. It wasn't angry, not yet. It was more like disappointment. A cold, creeping disappointment that started to seep into the cracks of my confidence. I tried to laugh it off again to lighten the mood. Seriously, guys, I'm such an idiot sometimes, right? But we can get it fixed first thing tomorrow, no biggie. I looked from face to face, searching for the familiar warmth, the easy forgiveness, but it wasn't there. Not quite, Liam finally spoke, his voice a little too flat. Yeah, Chloe, no biggie. The words were right, but the tone was all wrong. It was like a tiny, almost invisible crack appearing in a perfectly smooth pane of glass. I brushed it off, told myself I was overthinking it. They were just tired, maybe a little annoyed. It was a small thing, after all. A tiny, insignificant mistake. It couldn't possibly be the beginning of the end, could it? I had no idea that this tiny crack was about to shatter my entire world. That small thing, that tiny, accidental slip up with the banner design, it started to grow. Like a tiny seed planted in fertile ground, it sprouted and began to twist itself around everything. At first, it was just a passing comment. Oh, remember when Chloe messed up the banner? Good thing we caught it in time, said with a laugh, but a laugh that didn't quite reach their eyes. Then it became a running joke, a shorthand for any minor inconvenience. Classic Chloe, they'd say, whenever something went slightly awry, even if I had nothing to do with it. The words themselves weren't sharp, but the way they were delivered, the knowing glances exchanged over my head, they were like tiny needles pricking at my skin. The coffee shop, once our sanctuary, started to feel like a stage where I was constantly being judged. Our conversations, once free flowing and inclusive, began to have these strange, uncomfortable pauses when I spoke. Or worse, they'd just talk over me, their voices blending into a wall of sound that I couldn't penetrate. I'd try to join in to offer an opinion or a joke, and my words would just hang in the air, unheard, unacknowledged. It was like I was slowly fading from their perception, becoming transparent. I'd watch them laugh at something Liam said, or lean in conspiratorially when Maya whispered a secret to Noah, and I'd feel this cold, hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't outright yelling, no dramatic confrontations. It was far more insidious. It was the slow, deliberate withdrawal of warmth, of connection, of friendship itself. I tried to fix it. God, I tried so hard. I apologized again and again for the banner, even though it had been weeks ago and long since resolved. I offered to do extra work for the charity event to make up for my mistake. I brought them their favorite coffees, remembered little details about their lives, tried to be the old Chloe, the one they used to love. But every effort I made seemed to bounce off an invisible wall. My apologies were met with dismissive waves of the hand, my offers of help with vague, noncommittal answers. It's fine, Chloe, they'd say, but their eyes would be elsewhere, their attention already drifting. It was like they were talking to a ghost. The passive bullying escalated. It wasn't just about the banner anymore. It was about everything. If I was quiet, I was moody. If I was loud, I was overbearing. If I shared an idea, it was silly or impractical. If I didn't, I was not contributing. They started making plans right in front of me, whispering about movie nights or weekend trips, then suddenly remembering I was there and adding a half-hearted, "Oh, you can come too if you want," but with a tone that clearly said, "Please don't." I'd see their group chats light up on their phones, full of inside jokes and shared laughter, and I knew I wasn't in them anymore. The exclusion was a physical pain, a constant knot in my stomach. I started to question everything about myself. Was I really that flawed? Was I truly so annoying, so incompetent that my closest friends would just discard me? The self doubt became a suffocating blanket. I'd lie awake at night, replaying every conversation, every glance, every subtle slight. I'd search for what I had done wrong, what fatal flaw in my character had caused this seismic shift. The small thing I did, the accidental mistake, had somehow morphed into this massive, unforgivable sin in their eyes. And because they refused to acknowledge their part in it, refused to even admit they were treating me differently, I was left to carry the entire burden of guilt and confusion. The pain became unbearable. It wasn't just emotional anymore, it was physical. My chest felt tight, my head constantly throbbed, and sleep became a distant memory. I started losing weight, my appetite gone. The vibrant world I once knew turned gray and muted. Every morning felt like a battle just to get out of bed, to face another day of their cold indifference. I felt trapped, utterly alone, even when I was sitting right next to them. The silence between us, the unspoken judgment, was louder than any shout. This wasn't just a conflict. It was a slow, deliberate dismantling of my spirit. And as the days bled into weeks, the thought, the terrifying, desperate thought, began to whisper in the darkest corners of my mind. What if it would just be easier if I wasn't here at all? The idea, once unthinkable, started to feel like a comforting escape from the relentless agony of their betrayal. I was drowning, and the people who were supposed to be my lifelines were just standing on the shore, watching me sink. The whispers in my mind grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were a roar echoing in the empty chambers of my heart. The thought of just disappearing, of making the pain stop, became a constant companion. It was a dark, seductive promise of peace. I was so utterly exhausted, so broken by the relentless emotional assault, that the idea of simply ceasing to exist felt like the only way out. I was losing myself, piece by agonizing piece, and the people who were supposed to be my anchors were the ones cutting the ropes. One particularly brutal afternoon, after another session at the coffee shop where I was practically invisible, where their laughter felt like a physical blow, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out, not even bothering to say goodbye, and just started walking. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to escape the suffocating weight of their presence. My legs carried me aimlessly through the familiar streets, but everything looked different, distorted through the lens of my despair. The vibrant colors of the city seemed dull, the sounds muffled, as if I was moving through water. I ended up at a quiet park, a place we used to frequent, a place filled with so many happy memories that now felt like cruel taunts. I sat on a cold bench, watching families play, couples laugh, and the sheer normalcy of it all felt like a mockery. The contrast between their joy and my utter desolation was unbearable. That's when I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling. I knew I needed help. I knew I was teetering on the edge of something terrifying. And despite everything, despite the way they had treated me, a part of me, a desperate, naive part, still believed that if they truly understood how much pain I was in, they would snap out of it. They would remember the old Chloe, the old us. I typed out a message, my thumbs shaking so hard I kept making typos. It wasn't a cry for attention. It was a genuine, raw plea for help. I told them in stark, unvarnished terms about the suicidal thoughts that had been consuming me. I didn't blame them directly, not in that moment. I just explained that the conflict, the way things had been, had pushed me to a place I never thought I'd be. I laid bare my soul, my deepest vulnerability, hoping that this ultimate confession, would finally break through the wall they had built around themselves. I sent it to our group chat, the one that was now mostly silent, except for their whispered plans. And then I waited. Every second felt like an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I watched my phone, willing it to light up with a message, a call, anything. I imagined Liam's calm, reassuring voice, Maya's comforting hug, Noah's quiet understanding. I pictured them rushing to my side, telling me it was all a misunderstanding, that they loved me, that they were sorry. I clung to that hope, that fragile, desperate hope, like a drowning person clings to a piece of driftwood. Minutes turned into an hour. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the park. My phone remained stubbornly dark. No calls, no texts, nothing, just the deafening silence of their indifference. I checked the group chat again, my stomach churning. My message was there, unread by some, but clearly seen by others. The little blue ticks were there, indicating they had seen it. And still nothing, not a single word, not a "are you okay?" Not a "what's going on?" Not even a dismissive emoji, just silence. Then a notification popped up. Not from them, but from a mutual acquaintance, someone not even in our core group, who had apparently heard something through the grapevine. It was a screenshot. A screenshot of asterisk their asterisk group chat, a different one I wasn't in. And there it was, my message, my raw, desperate plea forwarded, and beneath it their comments. Seriously, is she for real? Of attention seeking much. Typical Chloe, always making everything about her. Honestly, it's like she wants asterisk to suffer. The words hit me like a physical blow, each one a poison dart aimed directly at my heart. It wasn't just indifference, it was active contempt. They weren't just ignoring my pain, they were mocking it, dismissing it, even enjoying asterisk it. The betrayal was so profound, so utterly soul crushing, that it stole the very air from my lungs. The world spun, and the ground beneath me felt like it was dissolving. The last shred of hope I had, the belief that they cared, even a little, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. In that moment, sitting alone in the fading light of the park, I realized with chilling clarity that they didn't just want me to suffer, they wanted me gone. And the terrifying part was, for a fleeting, agonizing second, I almost gave them what they wanted. But something else, something cold and hard, began to stir in the ashes of my broken heart. It wasn't despair anymore. It was something far more dangerous. The world didn't just spin, it tilted on its axis and then crashed down around me. The screenshot, those venomous words, burned themselves into my retinas. Attention seeking, wants to suffer. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was an annihilation. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had actively celebrated my agony, turning my deepest vulnerability into a sick joke. The raw, desperate plea I had sent, hoping for a lifeline, had been twisted into a weapon against me. I don't know how long I sat there, numb, the phone still clutched in my hand. The park lights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows that mirrored the chaos in my mind. The cold seeped into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the icy grip of despair that had seized my heart. Every memory, every shared laugh, every whispered secret now felt tainted, a cruel illusion. The friendships I had cherished, the people I had loved and trusted more than anyone, were nothing but a mirage. They were monsters, cloaked in the guise of familiarity. The suicidal thoughts, which had been a desperate plea for escape, suddenly felt different. They weren't about ending the pain anymore. They were about ending their asterisk power over me, but even that felt weak, a surrender. And then slowly something else began to surface from the depths of my shattered spirit. It wasn't hope. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a cold, hard ember glowing with a fierce, terrifying heat. It was anger, pure, unadulterated, righteous fury. It started as a tremor, a faint vibration beneath the rubble of my broken heart. Then it grew, a slow burn spreading through my veins, chasing away the numbness. How dare they? How dare they take my pain, my vulnerability, and turn it into a spectacle? How dare they mock the very thoughts that had almost consumed me? The injustice of it, the sheer cruelty, was a physical force, pushing me up from the bench. My legs felt unsteady, but there was a new kind of strength in them, a desperate, primal energy. I walked home in a daze, but it wasn't the same aimless wandering as before. There was a direction now, a grim purpose. The world was still muted, but the colors were starting to bleed back in, sharper, more intense, fueled by the inferno raging inside me. Every step was a declaration. Every breath was a silent vow. The tears that had been threatening to fall were gone, replaced by a dry, burning sensation behind my eyes. When I got back to my apartment, it felt like a tomb. The silence was deafening, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of their laughter, their dismissive words, their utter lack of empathy. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, but there was a flicker there, a spark that hadn't been there before. It wasn't the old Chloe looking back at me. This was someone new, someone forged in the crucible of betrayal. I deleted their numbers, all of them, blocked them on every social media platform. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. It was the first step in severing the toxic cords that still bound me to them. The thought of ever speaking to them again, of ever seeing their faces, filled me with a visceral disgust. They had pushed me to the absolute edge, to the brink of oblivion. They had watched me drown and then laughed. And in doing so, they had inadvertently ignited something within me that they could never extinguish. The next few days were a blur of raw emotion. The pain was still there, a constant companion, but it was no longer debilitating. It was a fuel. I spent hours just staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every subtle slight, every moment of their calculated cruelty. And with each replay, the anger solidified, hardening into a cold, unwavering resolve. They refused to take responsibility. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just disappear. They thought they could get away with it. A chilling calm settled over me. The desperation was gone, replaced by a quiet, dangerous clarity. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them break me. And I certainly wasn't going to let them forget what they had done. The idea of revenge, once a fleeting, dark fantasy, began to take root, growing stronger with every beat of my wounded heart. It wasn't about hurting them physically. It was about making them feel a fraction of the pain they had inflicted on me. It was about exposing their true nature, about making them face the consequences of their actions. Karma, I decided, was a dish best served cold, and I was about to become its most devoted chef. The game had changed, and they had no idea who they were truly playing against. The days that followed were a strange, suffocating blend of emptiness and a burning, restless energy. Blocking them, cutting them out, felt like tearing off a limb. The immediate pain was sharp, a phantom ache where they used to be. My phone, once buzzing with their messages, was now silent, a constant reminder of the void they had left. I was alone, truly, utterly alone, and that was the terrifying part. I'm a somewhat flawed person. I know that. I've always known it. I can be clumsy. Sometimes I talk too much. Sometimes I overthink everything. I make mistakes, big and small. The banner incident was just one of them, but I always tried to be a good friend, a loyal friend. I was always there for them, through their breakups, their family dramas, their moments of doubt. I poured my heart into those friendships. And now, looking back, I saw how they had weaponized my flaws, how they had used my vulnerability against me. They had taken my accidental mistake and twisted it into a justification for their cruelty. The silence in my apartment was deafening. It echoed the silence in my life. I hated being alone. I craved connection, the easy banter, the shared laughter. But the thought of meeting new people, of putting myself out there again, filled me with a paralyzing fear. What if it happened again? What if I showed them my flaws, my quirks, and they, too, would eventually turn on me? The trust I had so freely given had been shattered into a million irreparable pieces, and the idea of rebuilding it with strangers felt impossible. I was stuck in this agonizing limbo, desperate for friendship, terrified of finding it. But beneath the fear, the anger simmered. It was a constant, low hum, a relentless drumbeat in my mind. They refused to take responsibility for what happened. That was the core of it. They hadn't just hurt me, they had denied their actions, painted me as the villain, the attention seeker. They had walked away from the wreckage they created, completely unburdened, while I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered self. It was driving me crazy. The injustice of it was a poison, seeping into every thought, every waking moment. I started to see them differently. Not as the friends I once adored, but as characters in a twisted play, their masks slowly slipping. Liam, the calm, steady one, now seemed cold, calculating. Maya, the bubbly one, now appeared shallow, her laughter a cruel, empty sound. Noah, the quiet observer, now felt like a silent accomplice, his silence a form of complicity. They weren't just flawed, they were rotten. And they needed to face that. The idea of revenge, which had been a raw, emotional impulse, began to evolve. It wasn't about lashing out blindly. It was about strategy. It was about making them asterisk feel what I had felt, not through physical pain, but through the slow, agonizing erosion of their carefully constructed worlds. It wasn't about destroying their lives, but about exposing the truth of who they were, to themselves and to others. It was about karma. I started small. I wasn't going to confront them directly. That would be too easy for them to dismiss, to twist. No, this needed to be subtle, insidious. I began to observe, not in person, of course. I couldn't bear to be near them, but through the digital shadows they cast. Their social media profiles, once a source of shared joy, now became a hunting ground. I looked for patterns, for vulnerabilities, for anything that could be used. Their public personas, their carefully curated images, were ripe for disruption. I remembered little things, Liam's obsession with his online reputation, his carefully crafted image as the responsible one, Maya's desperate need for validation, her constant craving for attention and admiration, Noah's quiet pride in his intellectual superiority, his disdain for anything he deemed unintelligent. These weren't just quirks anymore, they were pressure points. Weaknesses I could exploit. A part of me, a tiny, lingering echo of the old Chloe, recoiled. Is this really you? It whispered. Are you really going to become this person? The thought of stooping to their level, of becoming as manipulative and cruel as they were, was unsettling. But then the memory of that screenshot of their mocking laughter at my deepest pain would flash through my mind, extinguishing any doubt. They had pushed me to this. They had created this version of me. And now they would face the consequences. I started making notes, compiling information. It felt almost clinical, detached, which was a strange contrast to the burning rage inside me. I wasn't just planning revenge, I was planning justice. A justice that the world wouldn't deliver on its own. They had refused to take responsibility. Fine, I would make them. I would make them see, truly see, the monster they had created. And I would make sure that everyone else saw it too. The game was on, and I was ready to play. The first step was to understand their vulnerabilities, not just emotionally, but practically. I needed to know their routines, their habits, their public and private faces. I wasn't stalking them in the traditional sense. I was observing, analyzing, like a detective piecing together a puzzle. Their social media was a goldmine. They posted everything, their hangouts, their complaints about work, their aspirations, even subtle hints about their personal lives. It was all there, laid bare for anyone who cared to look. And I cared deeply. Liam, the responsible one, was obsessed with his image. He worked for a small but highly reputable local nonprofit. He was always posting about their charity drives, their community outreach, his dedication to making a difference. His entire public persona was built on integrity and selflessness. This was his Achilles heel. He couldn't stand the idea of anyone questioning his moral compass. Maya, the bubbly, attention seeking one, was constantly chasing validation. She was an aspiring influencer, always posting perfectly curated selfies, documenting her amazing life, desperate for likes and comments. Her entire self worth seemed tied to external approval. Her biggest fear was being ignored, being seen as irrelevant or worse, as a fraud. Noah, the quiet, intellectual one, prided himself on his intelligence and his discerning taste. He worked in a niche academic field and often posted condescending remarks about popular culture or anything he deemed unintellectual. His ego was fragile, easily bruised by anything that challenged his perceived superiority. He couldn't stand being made to look foolish or ignorant. My plan began to take shape, not as a single, explosive act, but as a series of calculated, subtle maneuvers, each one designed to chip away at their carefully constructed facades to expose the rot beneath. It wouldn't be immediate. It would be a slow burn, a creeping discomfort that would escalate into full-blown panic. I wanted them to feel the same insidious dread I had felt, the same confusion and self-doubt. I started with Liam. His nonprofit was organizing a major fundraising gala, a big event that he had been promoting heavily. He was in charge of the silent auction, a crucial part of their fundraising efforts. I remembered him boasting about securing a rare, signed first edition of a classic novel, a real showpiece for the auction. He had posted a blurry photo of it once, bragging about his connections. My first move was simple, almost imperceptible. I created a burner email account, completely untraceable. I then sent an anonymous tip to a local online forum that specialized in rare book collecting. The tip was vague, just a question. Heard a rumor about a rare first edition being auctioned off at the nonprofit name Gala. Anyone know if it's legitimate? Some of these charity auctions can be a bit questionable. I didn't accuse him directly. I just planted a seed of doubt. A tiny, almost invisible crack in his carefully polished image. Then I waited, I watched the forum. Within hours, the thread started to gain traction. People were curious, some were skeptical. Which book? Who's the seller? Is there proof of authenticity? The questions started to pile up. Liam, being the meticulous person he was, would undoubtedly be monitoring any online chatter about his gala. He would see it. He would see the subtle questioning of his integrity, the insinuation that something might be questionable. I knew he would dismiss it at first, probably even laugh it off, but the seed was planted. The doubt was there, and it would fester. He prided himself on his honesty, his transparency. This tiny, anonymous whisper of suspicion would gnaw at him. It wasn't a direct attack, not yet. It was just a gentle nudge, a subtle shift in the perception of him. It was the beginning of the erosion. My next target was Maya. Her entire world revolved around her online presence. She was constantly posting about her perfect life, her amazing friends, the ones who had betrayed me, her inspiring journey. I remembered her complaining once about how hard it was to get genuine engagement, how she sometimes felt like she was talking to herself. She craved comments, likes, shares. I found an old, obscure photo of her from years ago before she became so image conscious. It wasn't scandalous, just unflattering. A bad hair day, awkward pose, taken at a time when she wasn't trying to be perfect. I anonymously posted it on a public forum dedicated to influencer fails, with a caption that simply read, "Remember when influencers were just regular people?" Again, no direct attack, no harsh words. Just a subtle reminder of her less than glamorous past, a gentle poke at her carefully constructed facade of perfection. It was designed to make her feel exposed, vulnerable, to chip away at the curated image she worked so hard to maintain. These were just the opening moves, the first ripples in the pond. They were designed to be subtle, to cause discomfort and self doubt, not immediate destruction. I wanted them to feel the slow, creeping dread of being watched, of their carefully constructed realities beginning to unravel. They had pushed me to the edge, made me question my very existence. Now it was their turn to feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. And this was just the beginning. The real show was yet to come. The subtle jabs landed just as I'd anticipated. I watched from a distance as the ripples spread. Liam, the responsible one, started posting more frequently about the authenticity of the items for the gala, almost defensively. He even put out a public statement on the nonprofit's social media, assuring everyone of their rigorous vetting process. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. He was reacting. He was feeling the pressure of that tiny seed of doubt I'd planted. His carefully cultivated image was already starting to show cracks. Maya's reaction was more immediate, more emotional. The unflattering photo I'd anonymously posted on the Influencer Fails forum quickly gained traction. People weren't being overtly cruel, but the comments were exactly what I'd hoped for. She looks so different now. Is that even the same person? Wow, what a glow up or filter up. It wasn't about shaming her, but about exposing the artifice, the curated perfection she presented. I saw her Instagram stories become even more frantic, more desperate for validation. She posted a flurry of new, heavily filtered selfies, almost as if trying to bury the old image under a mountain of manufactured beauty. She was clearly rattled, her need for external approval exposed and vulnerable. And then there was Noah. He was the trickiest. His pride was intellectual, his disdain for anything he considered lowbrow. He often engaged in online debates, showcasing his supposed superior knowledge. I remembered him once scoffing at a popular science theory, dismissing it as simplistic and for the masses. He had even written a short, condescending blog post about it, full of jargon and thinly veiled insults towards anyone who believed it. My plan for Noah was more intricate, requiring a deeper dive into his online persona. I found his personal blog, a place where he often posted long, rambling essays filled with obscure references and complex theories. He rarely got comments, which probably fed his sense of intellectual isolation and superiority. I focused on that specific blog post about the popular science theory. I spent hours researching, not to understand the theory itself, but to find a very specific, obscure, and incorrect asterisk piece of information related to it. Something that sounded plausible but was fundamentally flawed, and that Noah, in his arrogance, might overlook or even embrace if it seemed to support his own convoluted arguments. I then created another anonymous account, this time posing as a fellow intellectual who admired his work. I left a comment on his blog post, praising his insight, and then, subtly, almost as an afterthought, I introduced the incorrect information, framing it as a fascinating new development or a little known fact that further supported his point. I used complex sounding language, mimicking his own style to make it seem legitimate. My goal wasn't to expose him as wrong immediately, but to bait him into incorporating this false information into his own arguments, to make him unknowingly spread misinformation under the guise of his superior intellect. I knew Noah, he would be flattered by the admiration. He would be eager to incorporate new, obscure facts that bolstered his arguments and made him seem even smarter. He would likely not double check the information, especially if it aligned with his existing biases. This wasn't about a quick takedown. It was about setting him up for a bigger fall, a public intellectual humiliation that would strike at the very core of his self worth. The satisfaction I felt wasn't triumphant, not yet. It was a cold, quiet sense of purpose. This wasn't about feeling good, it was about balance. They had made me feel worthless, exposed, and foolish. Now they were starting to feel the same. The fear of meeting new people, the pain of being alone, still gnawed at me. But the focus on my revenge, on this intricate dance of subtle manipulation, provided a strange kind of distraction, a grim purpose that kept me from sinking back into despair. I was becoming a different person, a colder, more calculating version of myself. The old Chloe, the one who wore her heart on her sleeve, was buried deep beneath layers of hurt and anger. This new Chloe was a strategist, a silent observer, moving in the shadows. I knew this path was dark, that it might change me irrevocably. But the alternative, the thought of letting them get away with it, of letting their cruelty define my future, was simply unbearable. They had pushed me to the edge. Now I was pushing back, and the game was only just beginning to get interesting. The subtle nudges had done their job. Liam was visibly more stressed, constantly checking his phone, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a nervous energy. Maya's online presence became almost frantic, a desperate attempt to regain control of her narrative. And Noah, true to form, had taken the bait. I saw his blog update, a new post incorporating the subtly flawed fact I had fed him, presented as his own brilliant discovery. He even cited a non existent, obscure paper that I had invented. The trap was set. My next moves needed to be more direct, but still untraceable. I needed to escalate the pressure, to make them feel the walls closing in without ever revealing my hand. The goal wasn't just to expose their flaws, but to make them face the consequences of their actions, to feel the isolation and judgment they had inflicted on me. For Liam, the gala was fast approaching. His nonprofit relied heavily on these events. I knew he had a habit of leaving important documents on his desk at the office, especially when he was stressed. He was meticulous, but also prone to oversight when under pressure. I had a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same building, a casual friend who sometimes helped out at the nonprofit on a volunteer basis. This person was completely unaware of my intentions, of course. I crafted an anonymous email, posing as a concerned donor who had heard the rumors about the questionable items. I attached a fabricated document, a very convincing but fake internal memo from the nonprofit, hinting at a minor discrepancy in the silent auction inventory, specifically mentioning the rare book. The memo was designed to look like it had been accidentally leaked. I sent it to the nonprofit's board members, and crucially, I BCC'd a local investigative journalist known for exposing charity scandals. The email was polite, concerned, and utterly devastating. It didn't accuse Liam directly, but it placed him squarely in the crosshairs of a potential scandal, right before his biggest event of the year. The journalist would definitely follow up on a tip like that, especially with a leaked memo. For Maya, her online world was her everything. I knew she had a small but dedicated group of followers who genuinely admired her. I also knew she had a tendency to buy followers and likes to boost her numbers, a common but frowned upon practice in the influencer world. I had seen her mention it once, jokingly, to our group, thinking it was a harmless secret. I compiled a list of her most obvious fake followers and engagement bots. Then, I created a series of anonymous accounts, each designed to look like a concerned fan. These accounts started leaving comments on her posts, not overtly accusatory, but subtly questioning her authenticity. Your engagement seems a bit off lately, Maya. Are these all real people? Love your content, but sometimes it feels a little too perfect. I also sent anonymous tips to a few popular influencer watchdog accounts, providing them with evidence of her purchased engagement. The goal was to create a public conversation around her authenticity, to make her genuine followers start to question her, and to make her feel the crushing weight of public scrutiny. Her carefully constructed facade of popularity was about to crumble. Noah's downfall required a different approach. He had proudly incorporated my fabricated fact into his blog post. Now it was time to expose it. I found a genuine expert in the field he had written about, a well respected academic with a strong online presence. I anonymously sent this expert a link to Noah's blog post, along with a polite, seemingly innocent question. I came across this interesting blog post by Noah's name about popular science theory. He mentions the fabricated fact I inserted. Is this a widely accepted concept in the field? I'm just curious to learn more. I knew the expert would immediately recognize the fabricated information as incorrect, possibly even absurd. And given Noah's condescending tone in his original post, I suspected the expert wouldn't be too gentle in their correction. My hope was that the expert would publicly debunk Noah's discovery, perhaps even on their own popular platform, exposing his intellectual arrogance and the flawed research he had presented as fact. It would be a public humiliation, a direct challenge to his perceived superiority, coming from a source he couldn't dismiss. The tension in my apartment was palpable, a silent hum of anticipation. I was a puppet master, pulling strings from the shadows, watching my former friends dance to a tune of their own making. The fear of being alone was still there, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by a grim satisfaction. They had pushed me to the brink, made me feel like I was losing my mind. Now it was their turn to feel the ground crumble beneath their feet. The revenge wasn't about making me feel better, it was about making them feel what I had felt. And the wheels of karma were turning, slowly but surely. The fallout was swift and brutal, far more satisfying than I had dared to imagine. The universe, it seemed, was finally aligning. Liam's gala was a disaster. The leaked memo and the journalists' inquiries had thrown the nonprofit into a tailspin. Board members were furious, donors were pulling out, and the media was circling like vultures. The rare book, which was supposed to be the star of the silent auction, was now under intense scrutiny, its authenticity publicly questioned. Liam, the responsible one, was suddenly the face of a potential scandal. I saw a local news report online, a brief segment about the unanswered questions surrounding the nonprofit's fundraising. Liam was interviewed, looking pale and flustered, stammering through his reassurances. His carefully constructed image of integrity was crumbling before his very eyes. He was being publicly humiliated. His reputation, which he valued above all else, was being dragged through the mud. The nonprofit, which was his entire identity, was now tainted. He was losing everything he had built, all because of a tiny seed of doubt I had planted. The irony was a bitter, delicious taste in my mouth. Maya's online world, her carefully curated kingdom of likes and validation, imploded. The influencer watchdog accounts picked up on the tips I'd sent, and the evidence of her purchased followers was undeniable. They posted detailed analyses, exposing her inflated numbers and fake engagement. Her concerned fans' comments multiplied, turning into a chorus of doubt and disappointment. Her genuine followers, feeling betrayed, started unfollowing her in droves. Her comment section, once overflowing with praise, was now filled with accusations of fraud and calls for authenticity. I watched her follower count plummet, her engagement rates flatline. She tried to post defiant messages, claiming it was all haters and jealousy, but her voice was drowned out by the growing tide of public disapproval. Her carefully constructed facade of popularity shattered, leaving her exposed and irrelevant. The silence of her once adoring audience was a far more potent weapon than any direct insult. She was being ignored, dismissed, and exposed as a fraud, her greatest fear realized. Noah's intellectual pride suffered the most spectacular fall. The academic expert I had contacted didn't just correct him, they dismantled his entire argument publicly and thoroughly. The expert, a well known figure in their field, posted a detailed, scathing rebuttal on their own popular blog, meticulously dissecting Noah's discovery and exposing the fabricated fact I had fed him. The expert didn't hold back, calling Noah's post intellectually dishonest and a disservice to genuine scientific inquiry. The comment section beneath the expert's post was brutal, filled with other academics and enthusiasts mocking Noah's arrogance and ignorance. Noah, who prided himself on his superior intellect, was now a laughingstock in the very circles he sought to impress. His carefully constructed image of intellectual superiority was not just challenged, it was obliterated. He was made to look foolish, incompetent, and utterly devoid of the intelligence he so desperately flaunted. The satisfaction I felt was profound, but it wasn't joyful. It was a cold, hard sense of justice. They had pushed me to the brink of self destruction, mocked my pain, and refused to take responsibility. Now they were facing the consequences of their actions, not through my direct confrontation, but through the very systems they relied upon for their identities. Their reputations, their validation, their intellectual pride, all were crumbling around them. I still felt the lingering pain of their betrayal, the deep wound of lost friendship, and the fear of being alone, of never finding genuine connection again, still haunted me. But the suffocating despair had lifted. I was no longer drowning. I was standing on solid ground, watching the tide of karma wash over them. I didn't reach out to them. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The public humiliation they were experiencing was far more potent than anything I could say. They were isolated, exposed, and facing the very consequences they had so carelessly inflicted on me. The silence from them was deafening, but this time it was a silence of their own making, a silence born of their shame and downfall. The revenge wasn't about making me feel better about myself. It was about making them feel the weight of their actions. It was about showing them that there are consequences for cruelty, for indifference, for pushing someone to the edge. I had survived. I had fought back, not with anger and tears, but with cold, calculated precision. And as I watched their worlds unravel, a new, fragile sense of self-worth began to emerge from the ashes of my broken heart. I was still flawed, yes, but I was also strong. And I was a survivor. The story wasn't over, but this chapter, the one where they held all the power, was definitively closed. The immediate aftermath of their public downfalls brought a strange, unsettling quiet. The frantic energy that had fueled my revenge began to dissipate, leaving behind a hollow echo. The satisfaction was real, a cold, hard truth, but it wasn't the triumphant, joyous feeling I might have once imagined. It was more like the quiet after a storm, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably changed. I was still alone. The fear of meeting new people, of trusting again, remained a heavy shroud. The betrayal had cut so deep that the idea of opening myself up to anyone felt like an act of self sabotage. Every potential new acquaintance felt like a potential new betrayer. My mind, once so focused on their destruction, now turned inward, grappling with the wreckage of my own life. The revenge had been a powerful distraction, a grim purpose that kept me from sinking back into the abyss of despair. But now that the immediate acts were done, the silence returned, louder than ever. I found myself staring at walls, replaying not just their cruelty, but my own transformation. I had become a strategist, a manipulator, operating in the shadows. Was this who I was now? Was this the person I wanted to be? The questions gnawed at me, relentless and unsettling. I saw glimpses of them sometimes, not in person, but through the lingering tendrils of the internet. Liam's nonprofit was struggling, facing a major PR crisis. He had been demoted, his once promising career now stalled, his reputation tarnished. Maya's social media accounts were ghost towns, her follower count a fraction of what it once was. She had stopped posting, her desperate need for validation now met with deafening silence. Noah's blog was dormant, his intellectual arrogance replaced by a conspicuous absence from online debates. He had retreated, his pride shattered. They were suffering. They were experiencing a fraction of the isolation, the public scrutiny, the loss of identity that they had inflicted on me. And yet, it didn't bring back the old Chloe. It didn't heal the wounds, it just was. The realization hit me with a quiet force. Revenge, while satisfying in the moment, doesn't fill the void. It doesn't bring back what was lost. It just creates a new kind of emptiness. I had spent so much energy, so much of my shattered self, on making them pay that I hadn't focused on rebuilding myself. I was still stuck, still afraid, still alone. This was the moral dilemma. Had I become as bad as them? Had I, in my pursuit of justice, sacrificed a part of my own humanity? The old Chloe would have been horrified by the calculating, cold person I had become. But the old Chloe was also the one who had been pushed to the brink of ending her own life. Was this transformation a necessary evil, a survival mechanism, or a descent into darkness? I started to reflect on my own flaws, not as reasons for their betrayal, but as parts of myself I needed to understand and accept. I was a flawed person, yes, but being flawed didn't justify their cruelty. And their cruelty didn't justify me becoming a monster. There had to be a middle ground, a way to heal without becoming consumed by bitterness. The desire for revenge, while potent, had been a temporary fix. It had given me a sense of control when I felt utterly powerless. But true healing, I realized, lay not in their downfall, but in my own rise. It lay in finding a way to live with the pain, to accept my past, and to cautiously, painstakingly rebuild my future. The path forward was unclear. The fear of being alone was still a heavy weight, but the anger, while still present, was no longer the sole driving force. A new, fragile thought began to emerge. Perhaps, just perhaps, I could find a way to move on, not by forgetting what they did, but by choosing not to let it define me forever. The revenge had been executed. Now, the real challenge began, the long, arduous journey of self-reconstruction. And that, I knew, would be far more difficult than any act of vengeance. The quiet after the storm was not peaceful. It was a vacuum, pulling at the edges of my sanity. The satisfaction of their downfall, once a cold comfort, began to curdle into something else, a profound sense of emptiness. I had spent so much time, so much emotional energy, meticulously planning their demise that I hadn't considered what would happen once it was over. I was still alone, still haunted by the ghosts of what I thought were friendships, and now burdened by the weight of my own actions. The fear of meeting new people was a constant, suffocating presence. Every time I thought about stepping out, about trying to connect with someone new, the memory of their betrayal would flash through my mind. The image of their mocking faces, the screenshot of their cruel words would paralyze me. How could I trust anyone again? How could I ever believe in the sincerity of another person's kindness when the people I had loved most had proven to be so utterly heartless? I was stuck in a self imposed prison, built from the rubble of my shattered trust. I hated being alone. The silence in my apartment was a constant reminder of the void. I missed the easy laughter, the shared stories, even the mundane presence of another human being. But the thought of reaching out, of making myself vulnerable again, felt like walking into a fire. I was caught in a vicious cycle, craving connection, terrified of it. The anger which had been my fuel began to morph. It wasn't the burning rage anymore. It was a dull, persistent ache, a constant reminder of the injustice. They refused to take responsibility for what happened. That thought still echoed in my mind, driving me crazy. They had simply vanished from my life, leaving me to deal with the wreckage while they faced their own self inflicted consequences. But their consequences didn't erase my pain. They didn't magically heal the wounds they had inflicted. I started to question the very nature of revenge. Had it truly brought me peace? Or had it simply replaced one kind of suffering with another? I had sought to make them feel what I felt, but in doing so, I had become someone I barely recognized. The calculating, cold strategist was a far cry from the open, trusting person I used to be. Was this the price of survival, or had I simply traded one form of destruction for another? The days blurred into a monotonous routine of isolation and introspection. I tried to distract myself to fill the silence. I read books, watched endless movies, but nothing truly engaged me. My mind kept circling back to the past, to the betrayal, to the person I had become. One evening, as I sat in the dark, the silence pressing in on me, a different kind of thought emerged. It wasn't about them. It was about me, about my own agency. I had allowed their actions to define me, first as a victim, then as an avenger. But what if I could choose a different path? What if I could choose to define myself, not by their cruelty, but by my own resilience? It was a terrifying thought. It meant letting go of the anger, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. It meant facing the fear of loneliness head on, without the distraction of revenge. It meant acknowledging my own flaws, not as weaknesses to be exploited, but as parts of a complex human being. The idea of rebuilding, of finding a way to live with the pain without letting it consume me, felt monumental. It wasn't about forgetting what happened, that would be impossible. It was about integrating it, about learning from it, and about finding a way to move forward, even with the scars. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The trust was shattered. The fear was deeply ingrained. But the alternative, remaining trapped in the cycle of bitterness and isolation, was no longer an option. I had pushed them to the edge and they had fallen. Now it was my turn to pull myself back from the edge to find a way to live, truly live, again. The revenge had been executed. Now the real work began, the slow, painful, but ultimately necessary journey of healing and self discovery. It was time to stop looking back and start, however tentatively, looking forward. The decision to move forward to truly heal felt like trying to climb a sheer, icy cliff face. Every handhold was slippery, every step uncertain. The fear of falling back into the abyss of despair, or worse, into the cold, calculating persona I had adopted, was constant. But the alternative, remaining trapped in the bitter, lonely prison of my own making, was no longer an option. The first step was the hardest, acknowledging the depth of my own pain, not just the anger. The betrayal had left a gaping wound, and no amount of revenge could stitch it closed. I started by writing, not about them, not about the revenge, but about my feelings. Raw, unfiltered, messy emotions. The grief for the friendships I had lost, the confusion, the profound sense of abandonment. It was like lancing a wound, painful but necessary. I filled notebooks with my thoughts, my fears, my hopes, however faint. It was a way to externalize the chaos in my mind, to give it shape and form, and slowly to begin to understand it. I also started to reevaluate my own flaws, the ones they had weaponized against me. My clumsiness, my tendency to overthink, my open heart. Were these truly flaws, or were they just parts of who I was? I began to see them not as weaknesses, but as characteristics. My open heart, which had been so easily broken, was also what allowed me to connect deeply with people. My tendency to overthink, while sometimes paralyzing, also meant I was thoughtful and empathetic. It was a slow, painstaking process of self acceptance, of reclaiming parts of myself that had been twisted and shamed. The hardest part was still the loneliness. I hated being alone, but the fear of meeting new people was a formidable barrier. I couldn't just jump back into casual friendships. The trust was gone. So I started small. I joined an online forum for people who shared a niche hobby of mine, vintage photography. It was anonymous, low pressure. I could interact, share ideas, and feel a sense of connection without the immediate vulnerability of face to face interaction. It was a tiny step, but it was a step. I wasn't looking for new best friends, just a gentle reintroduction to human connection. I also started to seek professional help. It was a difficult decision, admitting that I couldn't do this alone. But the therapist provided a safe space, a neutral ground where I could unpack the trauma of the betrayal without judgment. They helped me understand the dynamics of what had happened, to process the grief, and to develop strategies for rebuilding my self worth and cautiously re engaging with the world. It was a slow, often painful process, but it was progress. The thought of them, my former friends, still surfaced. I would occasionally see a fleeting mention of Liam's nonprofit or a ghost of Maya's old social media presence. Noah had completely vanished from the online world. I didn't feel the burning anger anymore, not with the same intensity. It was more like a dull ache, a scar. I didn't wish them well, but I also didn't actively wish them ill. My focus had shifted from their downfall to my own rise. I realized that true responsibility wasn't just about them acknowledging their actions. It was about me taking responsibility for my own healing. They refused to take responsibility for what happened, and that was their burden to carry. My burden was to heal, to rebuild, to find a way to live a full life despite the pain they had inflicted. The journey was far from over. There were still days when the loneliness felt overwhelming, when the fear of trust felt insurmountable. But there were also moments of quiet strength, of small victories. A genuine laugh with someone online, a moment of clarity in therapy, a feeling of peace as I accepted a flaw as just a part of me. I was learning to live with the pain, not to suppress it, but to integrate it into my story. It was a part of my past, a brutal lesson, but it didn't have to define my future. The revenge had been a necessary catharsis, a way to reclaim some power. But the real power I was discovering lay in choosing to heal, to grow, and to cautiously, bravely, open myself up to the possibility of a different kind of future. A future where I wasn't defined by their betrayal, but by my own resilience. The path to healing was not a straight line. It was a winding, treacherous trail, often obscured by shadows. There were days when the progress felt agonizingly slow, when the loneliness pressed in, and the fear of ever trusting again felt insurmountable. I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, the echoes of their laughter and their cruel words still reverberating in the quiet of my apartment. The thought, "I hate being alone without any friends," was a constant, aching refrain. But I kept going. The writing became a lifeline, a way to process the raw emotions that still surfaced. I wrote about the small victories, a day where I didn't think about them at all, a moment of genuine laughter with a stranger in a coffee shop, a breakthrough in therapy. I was learning to be kind to myself, to acknowledge the immense trauma I had endured, and to celebrate every tiny step forward. The online photography forum continued to be a safe haven. It was a low stakes environment where I could connect with people over a shared passion, without the pressure of deep personal revelations. I started to participate more actively, sharing my own work, offering feedback to others. The positive interactions, the sense of being part of a community, however virtual, began to chip away at the walls I had built around myself. It was a gentle reminder that not everyone was out to hurt me, that genuine connection was still possible. My therapist helped me understand the concept of reparenting myself, giving myself the validation, the comfort, and the acceptance that my friends had so cruelly withheld. It was about building an internal sense of worth that wasn't dependent on external approval. This was crucial because the fear of meeting new people stemmed from the deep seated belief that my flaws would inevitably lead to rejection. I was learning to embrace my imperfections, to see them as unique aspects of my personality, not as reasons to be abandoned. One day, while browsing the photography forum, I saw a post about a local photography meetup. My heart immediately seized with fear. A real life gathering, face to face interaction, all the old anxieties flared up. What if they judge me? What if I say something stupid? What if they find out about my past? The thought of being exposed, of being vulnerable again, was terrifying. I almost closed the tab, but then a different thought surfaced. A quiet, determined voice that wasn't fueled by anger, but by a nascent sense of self worth. You survived worse than this. You are stronger than you think. You deserve to try. It took me 3 days to decide. 3 days of internal debate, of battling the fear. But finally, I sent a tentative RSVP. It was a small group, just 5 or 6 people, meeting at a local park to practice landscape photography. The stakes felt low, but for me, it was a monumental leap. The day of the meetup, my stomach was a knot of nerves. I almost chickened out multiple times, but I forced myself to go. I arrived early, my hands clammy, my heart pounding. The others arrived shortly after, a mix of ages and backgrounds. They were friendly, unassuming, focused on their cameras and the beautiful scenery. I kept my guard up at first, offering polite, brief answers. But as we walked, sharing tips and admiring each other's shots, something shifted. There was no judgment, no subtle digs, no whispered conversations behind my back, just shared passion and genuine interest. I found myself relaxing, even laughing. I talked about my struggles with certain camera settings, and instead of mockery, I received helpful advice. I shared a story about a particularly challenging shot, and they listened, genuinely engaged. It was a small moment, but it was profound. It wasn't about finding new best friends overnight. It was about realizing that connection was still possible, that not everyone was like them. It was about taking a tiny step out of the isolation and finding that the world wasn't as hostile as my trauma had led me to believe. The revenge had been about making them pay. This tentative step towards connection was about paying myself with the possibility of a future where I wasn't defined by their cruelty, but by my own courage to heal and to live. The journey was long, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. The scars remained, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of what I had survived and of the strength I had found within myself. The photography meetup was a small crack in the wall of my isolation, but it was enough to let in a sliver of light. It wasn't a sudden cure, but a gentle reminder that genuine human connection was still possible. I continued attending the meetups slowly, cautiously, letting my guard down. I learned names, shared more stories, and even found myself offering advice to newer members. The fear of judgment was still there, a faint hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer paralyzing. My therapist continued to be an invaluable guide. We talked extensively about the concept of forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. Forgiveness for the anger that had consumed me, for the person I had become in my pursuit of revenge. It wasn't about excusing their actions, but about releasing myself from the burden of carrying that hatred. It was a slow, painful process, like peeling back layers of scar tissue. I realized that holding onto the bitterness was only hurting me, keeping me tethered to the past and to the people who had caused me so much pain. The thought they refused to take responsibility for what happened and it's driving me crazy still surfaced. But now, when it did, I had a different response. Their refusal is their burden, not mine. I couldn't force them to acknowledge their cruelty. I couldn't make them feel remorse, but I could choose not to let their lack of responsibility continue to control my emotional state. My sanity, my peace, was my own to reclaim. I started to focus on building a life that was truly mine, independent of their influence or the shadow of their betrayal. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned, explored new interests, and even started volunteering at a local animal shelter. These activities, small as they seemed, were acts of self reclamation. They were about finding joy and purpose outside of the context of my past friendships. The loneliness was still a challenge, especially on quiet evenings, but it was no longer a suffocating void. It was an opportunity for self reflection, for growth. I learned to be comfortable in my own company, to find solace in books, in music, in the simple act of being present. I was slowly building a new relationship with myself, one based on acceptance and self compassion. I occasionally heard whispers about my former friends through the grapevine or saw fleeting glimpses of their lives online. Liam had left the nonprofit and was struggling to find new work, his reputation still a significant hurdle. Maya had completely disappeared from social media, her once vibrant online presence now a ghost. Noah had retreated into himself, rarely seen or heard from. Their lives, once so intertwined with mine, were now completely separate, their paths diverging into their own consequences. I didn't feel triumphant anymore, just a quiet, almost melancholic understanding. They had paid a price, yes, but the true cost of their actions was not just their public humiliation, but the kind of people they had become, the relationships they had destroyed, and the emptiness they had created within themselves. My revenge had exposed them, but it hadn't changed them, and it hadn't magically healed me. The healing came from within, from the painful process of self reflection, from the courage to step out of my comfort zone, from the slow, deliberate acts of self care and self acceptance. I was still a somewhat flawed person, yes, but I was also resilient, brave, and capable of profound growth. The fear of meeting new people was still there, a lingering scar, but it was no longer a barrier. I was learning to navigate it, to take calculated risks, to trust my own judgment. The journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but I was no longer defined by their betrayal. I was defined by my survival, by my strength, and by my unwavering commitment to building a life filled with genuine connection, even if it meant starting from scratch. The karma had come for them, but the true victory was my own liberation. I was finally, truly free. The winding path of healing eventually led me to a place I hadn't dared to dream of, a quiet, steady sense of peace. It wasn't a sudden, miraculous transformation, but a gradual unfolding, like a flower slowly turning towards the sun after a long, brutal winter. The fear of meeting new people, which had once been a suffocating blanket, had thinned to a manageable veil. It was still there, a faint whisper of caution, but it no longer dictated my every move. The photography meetups became a regular part of my life. I found myself looking forward to them, not with anxiety, but with genuine anticipation. It was there, among the click of camera shutters and the shared appreciation for light and composition, that I met Sarah. She was quiet like Noah, but her silence was thoughtful, not judgmental. She had a dry wit that made me laugh and a genuine curiosity about the world that mirrored my own. We started lingering after the meetups, grabbing coffee, talking about more than just photography. With Sarah, there was no pretense, no hidden agendas. I found myself, cautiously at first, sharing snippets of my past, not the raw, unfiltered trauma, but the lessons learned, the struggles overcome. And she listened, truly listened, with an empathy that felt like a warm embrace. She didn't offer platitudes or try to fix me. She just offered understanding. It was a revelation, a stark contrast to the performative friendships I had once clung to. I realized that genuine connection wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real, flaws and all. And my flaws, the ones they had weaponized against me, I started to see them differently. My tendency to overthink, which had once led to paralyzing anxiety, now allowed me to approach situations with careful consideration. My open heart, once so easily bruised, was also my greatest strength, allowing me to connect deeply and authentically with those who truly deserved it. My occasional clumsiness became a source of self deprecating humor, a reminder not to take myself too seriously. I was still a somewhat flawed person, yes, but those flaws were now part of my unique tapestry, not blemishes to be hidden. I was learning to love the person I was becoming, scars and all. The thought they refused to take responsibility for what happened and it's driving me crazy still flickered in my mind sometimes, but it no longer held the power to consume me. I had come to a profound understanding. Their refusal to take responsibility was asterisk their asterisk burden, not mine. It was a reflection of their character, not mine. I couldn't force them to see the truth, to feel remorse, or to acknowledge the pain they had inflicted. But I could choose not to let their choices define my peace. My sanity was no longer tied to their accountability. It was tied to my own healing, my own growth, my own liberation. I rarely thought of Liam, Maya, or Noah anymore. They were like distant echoes, fading into the background of a life that was now vibrant and full. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that Liam was still struggling to rebuild his career, his reputation permanently scarred. Maya had completely vanished from the public eye, her desperate need for validation now met with the silence she once feared. Noah had retreated into a solitary existence, his intellectual arrogance having alienated him from the very circles he sought to impress. Their karma had indeed come for them, not as a single, dramatic event, but as a slow, relentless unraveling of the lives they had so carefully constructed. The revenge had been a necessary catharsis, a way to reclaim my power when I felt utterly powerless. It had given me a grim purpose when despair threatened to swallow me whole, but it was not the source of my healing. The true healing came from the arduous, often painful journey of self discovery. It came from confronting my own pain, accepting my own flaws, and bravely stepping back into the world, one tentative step at a time. It came from choosing to build rather than destroy. I am Chloe. I was pushed to the edge, to the very brink of existence, by the people I called friends. They betrayed me, mocked my pain, and refused to take responsibility. But in their cruelty, they inadvertently forged something new within me, a resilience I never knew I possessed. I sought revenge, and karma delivered. But the real victory wasn't their downfall, it was my own rise. It was finding my way back from the darkness, not as the person I was before, but as someone stronger, wiser, and more authentically myself. I am still a work in progress, still learning, still growing. But I am no longer defined by their betrayal. I am defined by my survival, by my strength, and by the beautiful, messy, imperfect life I am now building, one genuine connection at a time. The past is a scar, a reminder of where I've been, but my eyes are firmly fixed on the horizon, on a future I am finally brave enough to embrace.